update. Just to let you know again, we are recording this panel, but I've heard from several people that they don't have access to the video on Zoom. We are chatting the link on our website to the slides. So look in the chat box if you don't have access to Zoom to see the slides. You can just download the slides from our website. The other housekeeping note is that if you want to ask questions during the session, please use the chat box during the session, and then at the end we will take Q&A. If you want to raise your hand at the end of the session during Q&A, you can do so, and you will be unmuted so that you can ask your question directly of the panelists. Without any further ado, I want to turn it over to Anna Rappaport, who is has done an amazing job organizing Caregiving and COVID-19, our next session, which is a very different perspective on the savings dilemma that we face during the current pandemic. And Anna will go ahead and introduce her panel. So Anna, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Welcome to the panel on caregiving and COVID-19. And can we have the first polling question, please? The question is, can we have the question up? Have you been or are you currently a caregiver for a parent or older family member? Or do you expect to be or need a caregiver? And we'll answer that as we have our introduction to the topic and the panel. Caregiving is a topic of great importance to individuals and to the advisors and financial services companies that support them. More than 1 in 5 American adults are caregivers to other adults. At the same time, many are balancing jobs. Some are also taking care of children, and people are trying to live their own lives. COVID-19 has sent many workers home so that they're trying to do their jobs, help other family members, and manage normal home activities, all from the same place. Parents were faced with supporting remote schooling last spring, as most schools went to a remote model, and it's unclear how schools will operate for the rest of the year. Access to health care has changed, and family members have been precluded from visiting others in senior facilities that offer care. And just as family and friends were terribly important in the topic before, they're even more important here. Seniors have been told to find someone else to do their shopping. Prior to COVID-19, Society of Actuaries research with people aged 85 and over showed that a majority needed some help and support, and that family is the most important and first source of support. COVID-19 increases the need for support, but there's little planning for such support. Caregivers have special issues to focus on so that they will take care of themselves and their finances. This is an emerging area for financial education, financial wellness programs, employers, and financial advisors. Our panel has done extensive work on this topic with several different twists. We'll start with each panelist introducing themselves, and then we will have an interactive panel discussion. And we've also provided you with a reference list so that you can pursue the research and resources we're discussing today. And I believe it's ASEC's intention to make those available in the future on the website. We have 3 panelists. Our panelists are Catherine Collinson, the CEO and President of Transamerica Institute, Cindy Hutchins, Director of Financial Gerontology, Bank of America Merrill, and Naomi Karp, Consulting Research Scholar at the Stanford Center on Longevity. And we'll start with Catherine introducing herself.
Well, thank you, Anna. It's great to be part of this panel today. Transamerica Institute is a nonprofit private foundation that gets its funding from Transamerica. We have a Center for Retirement Studies and a Center for Health Studies. And caregiving is a growing area of focus for us. Family caregivers, in doing this wonderful duty out of love, often put their own health, employment, and financial security at risk. I'd like to share a couple of insights from our most recent survey of workers, and I will ask for the next slide, please. Next slide, please. 35% of workers have either served as a caregiver or are serving as a caregiver right now. This includes 19% who have formerly been caregivers and 18% who are currently caregivers. Next slide, please. Among them, 87%, that's almost 9 in 10, have made some sort of adjustment to their working arrangements as a result of becoming a caregiver. It could be using vacation days, missing days of work, reducing hours. Some have even quit their jobs. Next slide, please. Caregiving is very personal to me. I have my own caregiving story to share, which may illustrate some of the risks that caregivers face. Back in 2003, my grandmother suffered a severe stroke. The doctors didn't think she was going to make it 5 hours, but they didn't know my grandmother. They revised their estimates to 5 days, 5 weeks, and then 5 months. My grandfather and my mother, who had been her only child, had passed away years ago, so I became her caregiver. Thankfully, she had financial resources to pay for assisted living, but still the intensity of the work as a caregiver could be overwhelming, managing her finances, insurance, doctor's appointments, and just being there for her. I was under intense pressure from my family and friends to quit my job. Thankfully, I had a manager at Transamerica who supported me, allowed flexible work arrangements, a flexible schedule, and working remotely. And that helped me keep my job. And that was something that was pretty unheard of in the early 2000s. So thankfully, I was able to stay employed. Many caregivers don't have that type of success story to tell. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, what if I had left Transamerica? It was my 5 years, I should add. My grandmother lived 5 extra years. She lived to 97 years old. If I had left Transamerica, it was my time as a caregiver that fueled my passion for incorporating what is now Transamerica Institute and making caregiving a strategic priority for us as an organization. Without that manager, I don't know where I'd be today. I don't know if I could have found a job. She passed away in late 2008. Imagine looking for a job at the height of the Great Recession without missing 5-year gap in the workforce. And from an employer perspective, I, in all likelihood, would not be here today sharing our research and concerns about caregivers on this panel. So thank you, Anna, and I will turn this over to the next speaker.
I think that's me. I'm Cindy Hutchins. I'm the Director of Financial Gerontology at Bank of America Merrill. I have been in the financial services industry for well over 30 years now. And somewhere during the course of my career, I guess you would call it my midlife crisis, my reevaluation of my career, I decided to go back to school and study gerontology. And it was really because I had noticed that the questions that people were asking throughout my financial advisor career and then as a retirement specialist, those questions had changed dramatically from the 80s when I started out until now. And most of those differences in those questions were because of this idea of longevity, of the fact that we're living longer. And so this longevity bonus, if you will, has changed everything that we do and that we think about as we approach our older years. And if I could have the next slide, please. So I am very excited to report that I am the first and, to my knowledge, the only gerontologist working at a Wall Street firm. And one of the things that we have done since I took on this role about 6 years ago is we've undertaken a series of studies to try to determine from a gerontological perspective what has changed just since the 1980s. And the first series of studies that we did was around this concept of life priorities. And To give you an idea of what I mean by that, in the 1980s, when I started in this business, retirement planning was very different, right? We were planning for a 10, maybe 15-year retirement. We were thinking about how we could use our savings to supplement our Social Security and our pensions. And we were kind of accumulating wealth for wealth's sake. But as we moved through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, what we found to be true is that because we're living longer lives, we're now accumulating wealth so that we can achieve our goals around what's important to us. We call those the life priorities. And so we embarked on a series of 7 studies to study each of the important priorities in our lives. Things like our finances, our family, our health, our work, how we spend our leisure time, how we give both to the community and to our families, and our home, where we live as we age. And so after we did that series of studies, then we embarked on another set of studies around what we call the life stages. And the reason we did that was because we recognized that life priorities are dynamic. While we all have an interest in those 7 that I mentioned, the order of importance changes as we move through the life course. And so we decided to study different life stages and how those life priorities play in. And so we studied early adulthood, parenting, caregiving, widowhood and divorce, and end of life and legacy planning. And I would say that as with all of those life stages, probably the most provocative study that we did was that study around caregiving. We do a lot of media when we launch these studies, and typically those interviews have a pretty predictable format. You're on the phone with a reporter and you're asked a series of questions and they're looking for that one quotable moment. And that's about it. But when we did the media around our caregiving study, what we found is that without fail, almost every interview that we did started with that reporter telling us their caregiving story. And so we found that this was a topic that was high on the priority list of just about everybody that we encountered. As a result of that, and as a result of those studies, I have focused a lot as part of our thought leadership team here at Bank of America Merrill. I focused a lot on this topic of caregiving, and I've come out with 3 papers just in recent months, within the last 12 months. One is called Caregiving in the Age of Longevity, which is a diversity and inclusion perspective on caregiving. Strategies to support working caregivers, because we consider these caregiver benefits to be a new opportunity for employers. And then just recently, a brief on information for older adults and caregivers in the age of COVID-19. So, we still have a huge focus on caregiving because we believe that it's a topic that resonates with just about 100% of the people that we serve. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Naomi.
Great, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. If you could move to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about one slice of caregiving, and that's what we call financial caregiving. And it's a caregiving role that we don't often think about. And before I talk, I'd like to mention that until last October, I was a senior policy analyst at the CFPB's Office for Older Americans. And so some of my remarks and the resources flow from the work that I did there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on the left here, you see Margot. She's 95. And she has moderate dementia, which has really accelerated over the past 5 years. And on the right, you see B. She's 99. She has traumatic brain injury from a fall. So what do Margot and B have in common? They're actually sisters who fled Nazi Germany as teenagers in the late 1930s. In their 90s, because of health issues, both moved hundreds of miles to live near their daughters. And both of them need financial caregivers because they can't manage their money and property on their own. Margot is my mom, and that's my personal caregiving journey. And I am her financial caregiver in addition to handling a lot of her other personal issues. I'm her agent under power of attorney, which is one type of financial caregiver. Next slide, please. Family caregivers play a vital role in coordinating and delivering healthcare and long-term services and supports for people who need help with activities of daily living. And so those are the kinds of things we often think about with caregiving. But those same caregivers often must manage finances, and that includes bill paying, banking, making purchases, keeping track of income, handling investments, budgeting, and so forth. Those caregivers often are not prepared for that financial role, especially on top of their other roles. But in my view, policymakers, professionals, employers, and other key players often fail to highlight this aspect of caregiving, and so I think we need to highlight it more. Without effective financial caregivers, care recipients are threatened with losses due to both their own financial mistakes and financial exploitation by others, unfortunately. And research shows that financial capacity is the first type of capacity to decline as people get mild cognitive impairment, and then many progress to dementia, not to mention other health effects that might impact their cognitive functioning. As much as $36 billion is lost annually to elder financial exploitation, and younger people with disabilities are also victims. And part of that is because the ability to detect a fraud or a scam declines with diminished financial capacity. So, educated family caregivers can safeguard income and assets and ensure that they go for needed care and services. Now, of course, we know it's a double-edged sword. Access to someone else's money can lead to misuse of funds, and family members and other known trusted people are the most common perpetrators of financial exploitation, and victims often lose higher amounts in those cases. But I believe that most caregivers want to do the right thing, but just may not know how, and we need to make their job easier and build in some oversight. So I'll quickly mention a few solutions that we have now, and then a few things that still need work. The first is that we really need to encourage and provide advanced care planning to make sure that caregivers have the legal authority they need to make financial decisions should the need arise. And I'll address this later during our discussion. Once the caregiver has that fiduciary authority, whether it be through a power of attorney, a trust, guardianship, or something else, they need to understand the ethical, legal, and practical duties. And I'll talk a little bit about the free Managing Someone Else's Money guides from CFPB that provide actionable plain language tools to do just that. We also now have tech solutions that can help caregivers manage someone else's money and protect it. For example, I'll just name a couple of companies. There's a company called EverSafe that monitors across a person's accounts, credit cards, their credit data, and provides alerts both to the older adult and their trusted advocates if there's a red flag for fraud. And there's Silver Bills that calls itself a concierge household bill manager for older adults and their families. In addition to that, banks, credit unions, and other financial services companies do provide services, and we need them to become more widespread. So what still needs work? Policymakers and providers, and that would include employers and everyone participating here, need to reframe concepts of caregiving to include financial care as a key component. We need to encourage more innovative technology, and I wonder sometimes with current demographic trends, why aren't there more tech solutions available? And I think they really are coming down the pipe. And finally, we do need more research on the needs of financial caregivers and evaluation of the existing tools. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Anna.
Thank you. Can we see the results of the first polling question, please? Okay. Oh, So this is interesting. 56% of us responded that they've been a caregiver or expect to be. 44% no, but I think as time goes on, we'll find that some of us that didn't expect to be will be in that shape. And I too have had the experience that when I was working on work relating to caregiving and asked people to help me with it, the first thing is I would hear their caregiving story. We're ready to move now to the interactive panel and to change the slide format. So I'd like to start with the first panel question, and we're ready for the showing the panelists in gallery view. I think we were going to do that. Yes. Oh, okay. Thank you. So we want to move on now to the panel. The first question is, are employers supporting caregivers and how? What should wellness programs, advisors, and employers do? How can they make that work? Catherine, can you lead us off?
Sure, thanks, Anna. Last year, before the pandemic, we published a survey of employers which found that most could be doing more to support their caregiving employees. For example, fewer than 1 in 5 employers offered an employee assistance program that included specific counseling and referral services for caregivers. We also found that many employers are not yet offering other types of employee benefits that caregivers would particularly benefit from. For example, relatively few offer a workplace wellness program or financial wellness program. Something else that we found in the research is that large companies are more likely to offer resources to their caregivers than small businesses, and this applies to employee benefits in general. However, across the board, employers can be doing more. And one thing I'd specifically like to highlight is the extending eligibility of benefits to all employees, not just full-time employees. Many caregivers work part-time because of their caregiving duties. And they could really benefit from access to these benefits. Now, employers may be asking, what is in it for them? Well, the benefits to employers for supporting their caregiving employees include attracting and retaining talent, avoiding presenteeism and absenteeism, and optimizing their overall workforce management. And I'll say from my own experience as a caregiver, the support I received, they were able to keep me as an employee, but it also built a sense of camaraderie among other employees who it turns out were caregivers as well, and goodwill throughout the organization, knowing that if any of us had some sort of family crisis, that we had a support system at work that could help us through it. So with that, I'll turn this back to you, Anna.
Thank you. Our next question, many Americans are regular caregivers for their parents, grandparents, or other adults. This makes managing their lives and their jobs more challenging. Do financial wellness programs and financial advisors support caregivers? Cindy, you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. And if I could, I'd like to just take a step back and go back to the polling question for a moment. I thought it was interesting that about 56% said that they were or expected to be a caregiver, with about 44% saying no. But what I found very interesting is that one study reported that about 41% of caregivers enter that role suddenly. So I think to your point, Anna, about not anticipating that we're being a caregiver, but then suddenly being thrust in that role, I think that might be reflected in those poll numbers. To answer your question, while employers are starting to offer some type of caregiving resources in their financial wellness programs, many employees aren't aware that these programs are being offered. And on top of that, many who are aware are failing to take advantage of those types of benefits. So there's definitely a bit of a disconnect caused by what I think would be a lack of effective communication of the benefits and resources available across the workforce. But many employers have added benefits that mirror the benefits that they would offer traditionally to new parents. As an example, things like flexible work hours, the ability to work from home, maybe subsidies that help with the expense of hiring in-home care providers, and some are supplementing the cost of care consultation programs, so consultation with a geriatric care manager. From the financial advisor perspective, many financial advisors are beginning to acknowledge that caregiving expenses overall can have a negative impact on their clients' retirement plans. And so they've begun to incorporate caregiving planning into their overall retirement financial plans. The cost of care for a loved one, the anticipated cost of care for yourself, the cost of long-term care insurance. These are all examples of what I would call caregiving line items that financial advisors are now addressing in their comprehensive financial planning. And in addition, discussions are starting to take place. That financial advisor client discussion is starting to center around topics like, where would you like to receive your care in the event that you need it? It might be in their current home, it might be in a retirement community, assisted living, et cetera. And so they're starting to address that. They're also starting to address the need for possible renovations to a current home. So when is that likely to occur? How much is it likely to cost? Should aging in place be the desired outcome? Things like, who will provide your care, and how can the financial advisor assist in developing a comprehensive care plan that can be adjusted over time as life circumstances of both the care provider and the care recipient change. So these are all things that financial advisors are now becoming trained on and more proficient at in discussing with their clients around caregiving.
And I am aware of a new program about to go live in September for online certification of financial advisors and training in some of the planning for caregiving and older life planning.
Yep.
So our next question, what are some of the financial and legal pitfalls that caregivers face? Naomi, can you help us with that?
Sure, thanks, Anna. So I think there are a number of financial and legal pitfalls, and some of those especially happen, several of you have stressed the fact that people can suddenly become caregivers. That can happen with financial caregiving as well, which makes it even more challenging. So these caregivers often are unprepared for managing money and property for the care recipient, and may not have the legal tools that they need. They really may not even be good at managing their own money and making their own financial choices. And now they have to do it for someone else. So they might make poor choices, and they might let things slide under the radar, and all of that can have pretty devastating consequences for the person who can no longer manage their own money. Another thing that we haven't really talked about much yet is family dynamics. So we know that money always causes tension in families, and these financial caregivers may face tensions with other family members over financial decisions about the care recipient's money. It may even be tension about, why did mom want you to be the one to manage the money, and what about me? So this is especially true if the care recipient has not in advance had critical conversations with family members about their financial situation, about their preferences for the future, and hasn't even necessarily made clear who should be their primary financial caregiver. Another problem that we see is that the caregiver may not even have the legal authority to manage the accounts, handle the property, et cetera. And if the care recipient is already cognitively impaired and hasn't planned for incapacity, and even that could happen suddenly. Someone could have a stroke and, quite suddenly be unable to manage their finances. If they haven't planned, and there's no power of attorney or trust in place, the caregiver may even need to go to court to get a guardianship or a conservatorship, and that it can be an expensive endeavor. It can be time consuming and it's very public. And we really would like people to be able to plan and make these choices and really retain their autonomy through doing that. There are problems with the caregivers may not even have basic knowledge about the care recipient's accounts, investments, real estate, things like gifting preferences, making it really hard for them to take over the finances or even help with bill paying and simple financial transactions. You know, how many times have we heard the stories about, you know, finding out that mom or dad had 10 or 15 bank accounts scattered all over that, you know, little by little they found out about. So planning ahead and having these critical conversations can go a long way towards avoiding some of these pitfalls. And a project that I'm working on right now is funded by the Society of Actuaries and AARP to create what we're calling a conversation guide to help people plan in advance and designate someone, a financial caregiver. Right now, we're calling them financial advocates. So stay tuned for that. It should be ready for prime time next spring, and we're going to be looking for all kinds of dissemination channels for that.
So our next question is, who are the major types of caregivers? And can you give us an example of what's unique about different situations? Cindy?
Yeah, so caregivers are about as diverse as the population itself, and there are several distinct groups of caregivers, and each of those groups face unique challenges that are going to shape their caregiver journey. There are unique challenges faced by spousal caregivers, long-distance caregivers, female caregivers, caregivers for those with dementia, LGBT caregivers, and, as Naomi mentioned, financial caregivers. As an example, spousal caregivers face unique physical, financial, and emotional challenges, especially if the caregiver need arises suddenly, such as a life-changing illness. In addition to providing daily care, these spousal caregivers are likely to be called upon to make decisions that could affect the care recipient's independence and also their quality of life. And this can be very hard for many spouses. In many cases, the caregiver also becomes the sole family breadwinner. So simultaneously managing the loss of their loved one's income and also on top of that paying for new medical expenses. Now, at the same time, spousal caregivers have to contend with the changing dynamics of that spousal relationship. And that can cause friction between the couple with feelings of loneliness and anger and resentment, even guilt and isolation. Many spousal caregivers might experience the traditional stages of grief, even though their spouse is still alive, because the relationship has changed so dramatically. Now, as Naomi mentioned, another example would be those who become financial caregivers, either as a financial contributor or a financial coordinator for a loved one. Really, caregivers who don't adequately prepare for this role can face many challenges, and many are significant. As an example, 1 in 4 financial coordinators report that they struggle to be granted permission from banks to access financial accounts. Nearly 1/2 of financial caregivers, as Naomi mentioned, don't have the legal authority to perform that role. Financial coordinators will typically find that their level of involvement in the loved one's financial life escalates over time. And just to put some numbers to that, with 53% of care recipients need full-time assistance with their finances after 2 years of care. So it's really important that we understand these different cohorts and the unique challenges that they're facing so that we can develop the resources to help them with their caregiver journey.
How does caregiving affect an individual's ability to work? Catherine?
Thank you, Anna. Well, in my opening slides, I referenced that among caregiving employees, almost 9 in 10 said they had made some sort of adjustment to their work arrangements or employment situation, ranging from time off work, reducing hours, reducing responsibilities, reducing pay. Some even quit their jobs. Now, at risk of stating the obvious, These adjustments can be highly disruptive to an individual's career and their long-term financial security. The implications of these adjustments are loss of income, loss of access to benefits, loss of access to promotional opportunities, and can collectively negatively affect one's ability to save for retirement for the point in time when they themselves may need care. For those who quit their jobs, the risks are even greater. Not only are they giving up income and benefits, we all know if somebody has been out of the workforce for an extended period of time, it is extremely difficult to jump back in and find work. The world moves so quickly these days. I want to end my thoughts on this with a comment about health. We've been talking a lot about financial implications of caregiving, but caregiving can also take a toll on the caregiver's health in terms of stress, anxiety, and exhaustion. And those risks are now even greater as caregivers are navigating through COVID-19.
We had a question about policymakers, and if they made caregivers fiduciaries, would that make fewer people willing to step in? And also, would there be other policy issues? And I think part of the answer to that question is that we've already got some caregiver fiduciary responsibility. And maybe Naomi can outline that for us and also mention if she sees other important policy solutions.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of the specific question, at least anecdotally, I don't really hear that much about caregivers being unwilling to serve as fiduciaries, although it does happen, but I think they just need a lot of tools and support so they have a better idea on how to do it. And if they're doing a reasonable job, they shouldn't be worrying about things like liability for it. But they do absolutely need to know about their legal and ethical duties. So to give a very basic outline of that, there are 4 main duties of fiduciaries in managing someone else's money, at least in the context of things like serving as an agent under a power of attorney or as a guardian or a conservator. And when I worked at the CFPB and we created the Managing Someone Else's Money Guides, which are for those lay people serving as fiduciaries, we wanted to take out the legalese. Don't use terms like do not commingle funds. And we wanted to put it really in plain language. So the first duty is act only in the person's best interest. Essentially, your care recipient is your client, and what you're doing is for them. And part of this is avoiding conflicts of interest. And I always like to give a concrete example here. So for example, let's say mom has dementia and she had named her son as her agent under power of attorney, and he's now managing the money. Son takes mom's money and goes out and buys a new car. And maybe once a month he takes mom shopping or takes her to the doctor in the car, but the rest of the time he's using the car for himself. So that may be a conflict of interest. And that seems in some ways pretty obvious, but an awful lot of people don't really know where those lines are. Another example could be mom's house needs some work and the son hires his own son who does carpentry to do the work. Well, maybe he's not the best one for the job, or maybe he's charging a higher fee. So you don't want to look like you're self-dealing at all. The second main one, again, seems obvious, is manage the money and property carefully. This involves things like, when you're starting out, inventorying what the assets are, making good investments, making sure things are insured. And it even includes things like maximizing public benefits, understanding what benefits may be out there and making sure that you're taking advantage of them for your care recipient. Thirdly, keep the money separate, and that's to ensure that it's spent for the care recipient's benefit only, and there's no blurring of the lines between your own money and mom's money. So it's better not to use your own money and pay yourself back. But if you did have to do that occasionally, you need to at least be sure that you have a really good paper trail on that. And so that leads to the fourth one, keeping good records. And this is to help, just help you do the financial management itself, but also to be able to account for your actions as a financial caregiver. Should someone else, either in your family or a court or another entity, want you to be able to show how exactly have you been managing the money. So people really need to understand those basic principles.
Thank you. We want to do a go round of the panel at this point. And we had a comment about diversity and there being proportionately more women and people of color involved in caregiving. So people could comment on that, particularly in light of our two questions I'm going to ask each panelist to comment in as they go around. We've talked today about this pretty much in the absence of COVID-19, but we want to, because it's been a problem for a long time. Catherine's story goes back many years, and all of us have stories that go back. But COVID-19 is with us, and our question is, has COVID-19 changed the situation of caregivers, and are there some things it's made more serious? And as we go around, I also want to ask each panelist if they have some resources that they think are particularly valuable from their organizations or that they know of from other organizations that they would like to share with people. You might highlight them. There's a list at the end of the slide deck, and that's material that's going to, eventually there's going to be resources on the website, but if you want to mention some resources as we go around, like to go around and ask those questions and think about the diversity as well. And on the go round, Catherine, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Wow, well, with COVID-19, the work of the caregiver has become infinitely more difficult. Caregiving for a loved one and balancing employment and family and other life responsibilities is already extremely difficult. And COVID-19 has taken something that was already difficult and just making it that much harder. And there are things that we can do to support caregivers. And I've learned so much from this conversation, and want to point out a couple of things is just raising awareness of the issue. Chances are somebody right now is a caregiver and you may not know it. One thing about caregivers is in my experience, tend to get so busy, just sort of disappear. They're not engaging socially because they're busy caregiving. And something we can all do is just look out among our family, our friends, our colleagues, and check in and see if we do have a caregiving family or friend, and what we can do to help ease their burden, help out in any little or big way. Of course, there are policy implications, employers, which I've spoken of length during this panel. One thing that has really struck me that employers can do, based on this discussion, is offer more training, both for managers who may have caregiving employees and training for caregiving employees so that they understand more about how to navigate care, fiduciary responsibilities, and just the ins and outs. Knowledge is power. In speaking of caregiver resources, on our website, I'd like to invite everybody to transamericainstitute.org. We have a section built out on caregiving, our caregiving research, and we have some outreach and educational materials.
Cindy?
Yeah, so just in the interest of time, first thing I want to highlight is in relation to COVID-19. Unfortunately, there are a lot of scams out there that have come up just since COVID-19 in the last several months, and I won't name each of them. There's probably about 10 of them, and these are detailed on the National Association of Insurance Commissioners website. So I would take a look at that and really avail yourself, become familiar with what these scams are, and to the extent that it's all possible, if you are a caregiver or if you're just an older adult, educate each other, educate yourself so that you can look out for these scams and not fall victim to them. In terms of resources, I would go back and highlight the three that I highlighted at the very beginning. One is called Information for Older Adults and Caregivers in the Age of COVID-19. I do highlight these scams in this brief, as well as several resources that are really useful for older adults and caregivers in dealing with COVID. And then the two white papers that I mentioned, one is called Caregiving in the Age of Longevity, a Diversity, Inclusion Perspective, and Strategies to Support Working Caregivers, a New Opportunity for Employers. And then finally, just one comment on the diversity topic, and that is that women are disproportionately affected by this idea of caregiving. We know that about 70% of the 40 million caregivers in this country are female. Their stress levels tend to be very high. They also tend to jump into that caregiving role 100%. We're finding that they're not delegating responsibilities, and so they're taking it all on themselves. And so the last comment I would make is to encourage women to delegate a little better, take better care of themselves so that they can avoid the health issues that many caregivers are faced with because they are so overwhelmed with their caregiving responsibilities. And to also remember that unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the caregiver journey is temporary. And so make sure that you're maintaining your other relationships so that when your caregiving journey does come to an end, those other relationships remain healthy and strong.
Can we put up the last polling question? And then as we're answering the polling question, we'll ask Naomi on the go round.
So should I go ahead, Anna?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. So in terms of COVID, you know, there just even more balancing acts now that caregivers face than they did before, and we really have as many questions as we do answers. So if the caregivers do not live with the care recipient, how do they balance the risks of face-to-face visits with the care recipient against you know, if they don't, the lack of care for and the social isolation faced by care recipients? We're learning more and more about the detrimental effects of social isolation on mental health as well as physical health, so that's a big problem. Caregivers need to think about, are their care recipients particularly vulnerable to the virus due to their age, comorbid conditions, and then especially with people with dementia, we have the challenges of people not understanding about the virus, not understanding the risks that the virus poses to them, and you know, perhaps engaging in risky behaviors. How, if at all, does a caregiver mitigate risks by limiting their own behavior, limiting their own social contacts? And can they supplement the care that they would provide with paid care? And if they do, what about the risks from introducing paid caregivers into the home? These are all really challenging questions. And then especially, we've seen so much in the news about people in nursing homes and COVID. And I guess I want to remind people that if your loved one or the person you're caring for resides in a nursing home, that doesn't mean you're not a caregiver anymore. You still have many caregiving responsibilities. So for care recipients living in nursing homes, there's been a huge impact from family caregivers not being able to visit, both in terms of the care they provide and not being able to be the eyes and ears of the person to make sure that they're receiving good care in the facility. There are similar issues for that with assisted living. and even independent living facilities that have been on lockdown or modified lockdown. And I know that with my situation with my own mom, I was not able to visit her at all for 3 months, and now I have started visiting her again because there is an outside patio and I'm able to see her out there, but it's just been very challenging. I have 24-hour caregivers, but I'm not there to watch what's happening. In terms of resources, I wanted to flag, well, first of all, in terms of the scam stuff, there's also good resources on some government websites. The Federal Trade Commission has a lot of stuff on COVID-related scams. I talked about CFPB resources, the Managing Someone Else's Money Guides. There's also Money Smart for Older Adults, which is general training on financial exploitation and scams. It's geared for older adults, but also for their caregivers. And there's also an advisory called Planning for Diminished Capacity and Illness. And then I just want to flag one other thing that I've been working on in terms of fiduciaries, specifically for legal guardians who are facing a lot of these same issues as caregivers. And the great majority of legal guardians are family members. With a group of other experts on guardianship, we have put together an FAQ document, questions guardians are posing during the pandemic, and those were all listed on our resource list.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists. And so we've asked for the last question, how likely is it that you will share materials related to the topics discussed in this session with your constituents? And some of you are very likely, some of you not. We hope that we've presented you with enough information to make you think that this indeed is a very important topic for American, both employees that are caring for retirees, and that it's very important to get this out to help people. We want to thank you. There are some resources in the appendix on the slide, and those resources are going to be made available through ASEC. So thank you all, and thank you to Laurie for inviting us to do this panel.
Thank you, Anna. This was really informative, and really appreciate all the insights and the references as well. That's very helpful. I want to switch gears now and move into our session of the ASIC Partners update, and we'll kick off the ball, or we'll get the ball rolling rather, with Betsy Jaffe talking about the new website that IBRI has been working on for ASEC. As many of you may know, ASEC is a program of IBRI, and there's been a huge leap in the website that we want to give you a preview of. So I'll turn it over to Betsy.
Thank you so much, Lori. And if we can just go to the next slide. So first of all, I'm so glad that we finally get to meet again, even though it's virtual. We are really getting close to launching our new modern ASEC website, I would say in early September. As you may be aware, the old ASEC and Choose to Save websites are old workhorses from times gone by. They definitely contained a lot of valuable information, but unfortunately, unlike fine wine, these sites are not improving with age. And so in short, we determined that it's time for these websites to retire. It's our goal for ASEC to be the trusted hub for information on savings. ASEC really brings together the government agencies, the nonprofits, and the private sector to unite in the cause of promoting savings and the financial security of Americans. And the website is an essential tool that will help ASEC realize its potential, particularly between meetings like this one today and the ones that we have coming up. So next slide. The homepage will feature ASEC's mission, front and center, and will showcase important sections of the website, including a special COVID-19 center, our savings resources page, and our partners page. Next slide. Our savings resource page contains important links to resources produced by government, nonprofit, and foundation partners. And basically, there are 4 different ways to find information: by savings goal, by life stage, by circumstance, and by partner. Next slide, please. Our savings goals include auto, college, next slide, please, emergency, home, next slide, and finally, last but not least, retirement. Next slide. The next way to find resources is by circumstance. These include caregiving, disability, next slide, please, loss of partner and spouse, helping adult children, next slide, and elder care. You can also find resources by life stages, which is divided into resources aimed at content most relevant to people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and lastly, 80s and beyond. There will also be a way of finding resources by partner. If your organization is an ASEC partner, we would love to feature your content. Please reach out to me at Jaffe, that's Jaffe, at ebree.org, so we can include links to your relevant information. Next slide. Our homepage also features access to our calendar. We would love to be able to feature your events that are open to other ASEC members. We will list partner meetings like this one. There will be a form so that you can submit your event to us so we can feature its date, time, description, and even hashtag. Next slide. The site will also feature resources on topics related to traps and pitfalls. And actually, we talked about quite a number of those traps and pitfalls today, such as fake COVID-19 communications, phishing, payday loans, and predatory lending. But beyond the scams, it will also feature information on things that can trip people up, like caregiving resources that explain the legal documents that you may need to manage other people's money, and including links to those guides that Naomi mentioned in the last session. Next slide. And next slide again. We'll be featuring select research from eBree relating to savings. Next slide. And we'll also include a form so you can submit your organization's research for inclusion. Next slide. Our next page features important tools. One of the most beloved tools is our retirement ballpark estimate. We have come such a long way since we first introduced that small scrap of paper that used to be used to estimate how much you need to save for retirement. Unfortunately, over the years, this interactive tool became out of date due to changes in Social Security rules and more. The great news is that we've actually received a grant that will allow us to offer the most accurate estimate we've ever been able to feature. So we're actually working on reprogramming that ballpark estimate, revising it, and we'll post this as soon as this important resource is available. We are also featuring interactive tools from our partners that address shopping for a home and mortgage, keeping track of credit, budgeting worksheets, finding abandoned retirement plans, and so much more. And again, if you have a tool that you want featured, please reach out to me. Next slide. As I mentioned before, we'll have COVID resources. Next slide. Our mission and history. Next slide, please. And finally, a fun trip down memory lane, where we're really going to take a look and reminisce about the old Choose to Save campaign. Next slide. Including our PSAs that won Emmy Awards. Next slide. Of course, we want people in groups to contact us. Next slide. And to join our growing list of partners. We would love to add more partners to the list and more logos to this page. This is just representational, it's not final. There will be a separate, a special section also to house information that are for ASEC members only, including notes from meetings like these. So in conclusion, I want to thank you for your kind attention. Don't forget to reach out to me at jaffe@ebri.org to get involved. We are going to be doing some beta testing of this site, and so let me know if you want to be part of that process. And finally, I'd be really remiss if I didn't thank our intern, Hunter Maurer, who's been helping out with this project. You might have heard from him over the last few weeks about getting access to your logo or content. He'll be heading back to Indiana University in a few weeks, and we hope that he'll continue to spread the word on the importance of savings. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Hunter. This is a terrific effort, and again, want to stress that we are seeking to be very inclusive in this website. If you do want to make sure that your information is included, reach out to Betsy. If you want to be a beta tester of the website, let us know, and clearly more to come. I will now pause here and invite our partners or anyone really on the call to raise your hand if you would like to share an update of what's going on with your organization during this time. Do we have any hands that are raised?
This is Carolyn Pemberton. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. How are you, Lori?
Very good, Carolyn. How are you?
Great. So I have a couple of updates from America Saves. The first is that we actually have just undergone a new branding initiative. So we have brand new logos for all of our programs. So I'll definitely send those along to include on the new ASEC website. And this also goes along with our release of some new tools and events that we're going to be releasing to help us reach even more Americans with messages around savings. On Thursday, tomorrow, we are hosting the second in our series of financial wellness workshops in the workplace. It's a webinar series, and this one's going to focus on helping employees save automatically in just 5 steps. And we are at capacity for the webinar, but the event will also be live streamed on the America Saves Facebook page. So if anyone is interested in joining us, they can connect that way. Samantha Melting, Vice President with Synchrony Bank, is going to be joining us to talk about Synchrony's experience in implementing Split to Save earlier this year. And then this fall, we're going to host a series of town hall events. Think Like a Saver events, where we're going to be bringing together financial experts, influencers, and everyday Americans to talk directly about saving strategies, and we'll be focusing on simple strategies to help you save on October 22nd, how to pay down debt on November 5th, and then saving for major life milestones, home buying, education, and retirement on November 19th. And that's all.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Great, you're welcome.
That's terrific. That's a lot.
It is. We're busy.
Sounds like it. Bobby?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Just quickly, I want to share a couple of updates from the FDIC. There's a plane overhead, so I'm hoping that it's not interfering with your ability to hear me. Just to let you know that we developed a coronavirus web page, and we continue to keep it updated. There are resources available for consumers and financial institutions, including videos. Within that website, we were also able to develop a web page related to EIP. As many of you are aware, we have our Money Smart financial education resources for individuals of all ages and small business. A couple of the resources were developed in partnership with other agencies, and As Naomi mentioned, I was very fortunate to be able to work with her early in the Money Smart for Older Adults project. So it was great to see and hear from you, Naomi. It was a great opportunity for me to be able to work with her on that project. We also expect in the near future to release an enhanced version of our Money Smart for young people, which also includes parent and caregiver guides that can be used, practical exercises that can be used at home with the family. And as we're in this virtual environment, we're finding many of our users are using it with that. So when we get our exact release date, I will share that so that it can be shared with all in attendance. And you can also check our Money Smart website for additional updates. In the fall, we also expect to release a new self-paced products based on our Money Smart for Adults. It's in the format of 14 games, focusing on each module. So we're looking forward to that. In addition, we're always seeking to grow our Money Smart Alliance. As you are aware, those are our partners. This is how we reach consumers, is through our relationships with organizations such as many of you online today. And then finally, just to share that we continue to work with others such as CFPB and NCUA, the Credit Union Administration, on keeping the savings message going and how we can best do that along with our collaboration with America Saves. So thank you everyone for this opportunity.
Thanks, Bobby. See that Tom has his hand up, Tom?
Hey, Lori, thank you. This is Tom Manganello from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it was a great program today. Thanks to all the speakers. We have been surprisingly busy, even though COVID-19 interrupted some of our outreach. I think we made a graceful transition to virtual presentations, and we've been keeping busy with that. I just wanted to remind this group that investor.gov has a lot of great information, including we rolled out our relationship summary or form CRS this on June 30th, where you've probably seen this if you have mutual funds or index funds or 401ks. You probably got something in the mail that discusses the relationship that you have with your investment professional, sort of the different services that they provide, how they're paid, key questions if you need conversation starters. We have some good information on investor.gov/CRS if you want to learn more about that. And we always have our alerts and bulletins, including our frauds targeting Main Street investors bulletin, which includes some of those COVID-19 scams that one of the speakers just referenced recently. There are pump and dumps, companies that promise they have either testing or cures or immunity for COVID-19. And the SEC has brought more than 30 trading suspensions since March to sort of address unreliable information that may be out there about publicly traded companies. We also talk about charitable scams and some of the bogus CDs or certificate of deposit scams that we've seen. Lori Schock wrote a director's take recently called Don't Panic, Plan It. And it talks a lot about investing in these turbulent times and the need to have sort of a long-range focus, the risk and return, and how that informs asset allocation and how you should consider your investments. And then finally, I'll just note that we have a public service campaign that's running on television right now. You may see it if you watch HGTV, Golf Channel, a bunch of other cable networks. But it focuses on the really important need to check the background of your investment professional. And when you do that, to get the full report. So you not only see if they're licensed and registered, but you can also see if they are, you can see their employment history, see if there have been disciplinary actions, customer complaints, that sort of thing. So we're trying to keep busy. We know you guys are too. We always look forward to partnering with the fellow members here of the ASEC. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm honored to now be part of the SEC's Investor Advisory Council, and I know we've got some very interesting work coming up on IRAs and on retirement security. So I know you'll be very busy in the future too. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Awesome. Congratulations, Lori.
Thank you. Barb?
Yes, this
Barb
is Barbara O'Neill, and I was formerly with Rutgers University for a number of years, and I've recently transitioned to full-time financial education entrepreneurship through my company Money Talk. And just want to let people know that, and also to let you know that I have a book coming out hopefully within the next 2 weeks, and it's called Flipping a Switch, and it's on 35 different transitions that people make in later life. And I owe it all to ASEC, actually, a presentation in July of 2018 on spending in retirement. And I believe it was Lori that made the comment after presenting the fact that there's a small subset of people who have saved so much and will never run out of money. And she made the comment, it's almost like we have to encourage people and teach them to flip a switch from saving to spending. That comment at the ASEC meeting 2 years ago was the genesis for my book. So I just wanted to let you all know, and ASEC is mentioned several times in the book as kind of the genesis of that thought. So that's it.
Terrific. Thank you. And congratulations.
Thanks.
We are doing a lot more research at EBRI on that topic as well. So there's much more to come. It's a very important topic. Ken Worthy?
Hello. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to update my fellow ASEC members. Similar to my fellow federal agencies and other board ASEC members, we have a plethora of resources on the coronavirus pandemic. You can access that by going to ncua.gov/coronavirus. We have frequently asked questions there for credit union member owners and also our institutions that we supervise. We also have supervisory guidance available on the site, just so you know what we are communicating to our institutions in terms of reg relief to help them work with their member owners and provide assistance to their consumers. We also have financial literacy and education resources on mycreditunion.gov, which is our consumer financial protection and financial literacy website. Many of those resources are a la carte resources that you can access. Like, we have interactive games for young people. We have articles on how to read a credit card statement. We have resources from across the federal government, from the FTC, SEC, CFPB, and FDIC on our site as well. We also continue our collaborations with the agencies I just mentioned, like the SEC, CFPB, and FDIC. Bobby Gray mentioned earlier. We've been working together, so we look forward to continue those collaborations. And if you ever have any questions about working with credit unions, or any questions for NCUA in terms of our supervisory guidance and what we're doing in the credit union industry, please let me know. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think that's all the hands that I see raised. Yeah, that looks like it. Anyone else before we adjourn?
Hi, it's Denise Murray. Just wanted to give a heads up that I will be sending an email out in about a week or a week and a half for the September-October financial literacy update. So if anybody has any information to get to me, please just respond to the email. And we will continue our COVID resources section. So I'll look forward to getting information from folks. Thank you.
Thanks. Karen?
Hi, it's Karen Richmond. I just wanted to thank you so much for this informative webinar. With my economist colleague, Joelle Saad-Lessler, we've been doing research on the relationship between collectivism or reciprocity, giving help to and receiving help from your friends and family networks, and the relationship between that and retirement savings. The research has been supported by the National Endowment for Financial Education and the reports we've done are available on the NIFI website, and we have a new major report coming out that shifts from our work that had been focused mostly on Latinos savings for retirement in relation to their collectivist practices to all demographics in the United States using the SIP.
That's terrific, very timely. IBRI also will be looking into the impact of the pandemic and also just the retirement prospects of different ethnicities with our retirement confidence survey next year. So that is an extremely hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I'd like to wrap up. It's been a very full day so far, and we've gotten a lot of great perspectives. I really want to thank all of our panelists. I thank the moderators for their yeoman's work on pulling all of this together, and thank the IBRI team for their work behind the scenes pulling this together as well. I want to remind everyone that we have an October 14 partners meeting. We will have an evaluation sent out to you directly after this, asking not only what you thought of today's meeting, but also for suggestions for October 14th, both in terms of the content and the format. It will unlikely be an in-person meeting at this point, so we'll be very open to suggestions on a virtual format. The other thing I want to mention is that there is an opportunity, as Betsy said, to join ASEC. We have a lot of wonderful things in the hopper for ASEC going forward. We'd love to have more members. If you have any interest in being an ASEC member, please reach out to Betsy at Jaffe@ebri.com, or rather at ebri.org, I should say. Thank you again for all of your time today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.